Hi, good morning, everybody. It's now the official start of Harfenlabor lectures. I'm very happy to do this, and I wanted to introduce you to my guests of today and also a little bit about what's the aim and the work what Harfenlabor wants to do. So my name is Margret Köll, and as the founder of Harfenlabor, I'm very glad to present the first online Harfenlabor lectures with two great guest speakers, which I invited to give a talk on Giovanni Girolamo Kapsberger with a special focus on basso continuo. It's Marie Dragosits from Vienna and Michele Pasotti from Pavia, but I think he's now at the sunny place. We don't tell.
Yes, that's true.
So before introducing my guests, I would like to welcome you on my quite new platform, Harfenlabor, which is a platform for an open discussion on topics related to the historical harp. So it's also related, of course, to the other continuo instruments. Already active as an analog network, Harfenlabor initiates and organizes research, symposia, and workshops. In its digital form as a web-based publication, Harfenlabor wants to present and disseminate this research content, making it more visible and widely accessible. The launch of the website will be in November of this year. So today's lectures actually will be already available on this new website. And I hope even a bit before in a kind of a preview version, because some of you already asked if it would be recorded because they cannot be with us today. So I want to present now the two guests. I start with the second guest, Michele, which is a leading international exponent and interpreter in the field of historical performance practice, and in particular of his instrument, the lute, in all its forms and stages of development. An active musician and specialist in early music, he performs everywhere as a soloist, chamber musician, and continuo player with orchestra. He is now currently professor for lute at the conservatories of Pavia and Cesena, and founder and director of one of the greatest ensembles that I know, La Fonte Musica, which is an ensemble specialized in late medieval music. And my third guest is Marie Dragosits. She is born in Tyrol, like me, and now living in Vienna. And Marie plays the harpsichord as a soloist and passionate continuo player, and she travels all in the world with different ensembles. She is now professor for harpsichord at the Anton Bruckner University in Linz, and her particular passion is to deal with historical harpsichords, which are documented by several recordings, highly acclaimed by the critics. She told me that her new program, Ich schlief, da träumte mir, will be released this year. Today, she will present parts of her new book, which she was published in October 2020, her biography of the early Baroque composer Giovanni Girolamo Kapsberger, ein ziemlich extravaganter Mann, on Libreria Musicale Italiana. So, Marie, I think the word is yours now.
Thank you, Margaret, first for the invitation and also for your nice presentation. I always kind of get a little bit red in my face when somebody speaks about me like this. So I'm very happy to see you all here. And I have to say that I do know some of you, not everybody. And I think there are many, many people who know maybe more on Kapsberger than I do. I just saw Ion somewhere. Now I don't see him anymore, but I think he's still here. He wrote a fantastic thesis about the early toccata, and also speaking very much about Kapsberger. And I see many people who play his music much more than I do. So I really want to invite all of you to give comments, to ask questions. I think Margaret can see on the chat if there is some, or also just wave your hands. Maybe we can just keep this very open, because I think there are people who maybe don't know a lot about Kapsberger and some who know very much. So maybe we can try to make this work for everybody who is here. Is there anybody who does not know anything about Kapsberger? If you dare to wave your hand. No. So maybe I'll just start with a short biography, but actually what I did was I did an artistic PhD in Leiden with the program Doc Artes. I started with his vocal music, which like 20 years ago when I started working on him was not very well known actually. It's now getting much more in focus, but still not all genres he composed, because he covered all styles of vocal music of his time. And I think he's still mostly seen as a theorbo player and as an instrumentalist. And when I started working on his vocal music, which I really find very interesting and very varied, I had the idea that I cannot really believe that he was just seen as an instrumentalist by his contemporaries. And by doing lots and lots and lots of research, I managed to confirm that his contemporaries indeed perceived him as one of the most important Roman composers of his time. And that's part of my results. And by doing lots of biographical work in the archives in Rome, in Venice, in Naples, in Florence, and in the end also in Augsburg, I discovered quite some biographical surprises. So maybe I go through his life, and you will recognize some bits you know from before. Those people who have already read my book will know everything what I say, and those who know a lot about Kapsberger but don't know the news, maybe they get some nice surprise as well. No questions so far, I think. You all understand me, I'm speaking loud enough. Good. Okay. So,
Everything perfect. No questions, because I'm like the head of the questions. Everything clear till now.
Perfect. He's not yet even born. So he was born in Venice, maybe in 1580. We don't know that for sure. In his death certificate in 1651, he's said to have died in his 71st year of life. So this is how we count back, and we arrive at 1580 as a kind of approximate date, but together with other dates in his life, it seems quite probable that this is true. You all know that he has a German name, Kapsberger, and we also know him on one hand as Johann Hieronymus Kapsberger, and then he also is equally well known as Giovanni Girolamo Kapsberger, because he lived in Italy nearly all his life, and he published with his Italian name. So people, I think he always, he was very proud of being a noble German, a nobile Alemanno, and he used this very often as his kind of trademark. But I think he spent at least 75 years in Italy. So I think, 65. We can consider him an Italian. Somehow maybe sitting on two chairs and playing his nationality, the German nationality, also intelligently for proceeding with his career, as we will see later. We don't know anything about his childhood in Venice, but we know that he really was born in Venice, because he himself says that in the birth certificates of two of his sons. And we also, that's a very big surprise, which I only found out at the end of my research. When he was about 10 years old, he was sent to Augsburg to school. and he attended the Jesuit gymnasium in Augsburg. Before I found this, we did not even know if he crossed the Alps at least once, because there was no proof that he ever was on German soil somehow. Now we know that he was sent to Augsburg shortly after 1590, so with kind of 10 years, which you have to imagine a young boy grown up in Venice is sent to school alone in Augsburg with 10 years. In this time, I think this is quite a, I'm sure it was interesting for him, but it must have been also, must have felt quite hard, at least in the beginning. And also about Augsburg, we don't know very much because the Jesuit school, you know that the order of the Jesuits has had some difficult times and was suppressed also for decades. And because of this, the documents of the school are not in Augsburg anymore, or they are just, a lot of it has been lost and other things are very, very difficult to trace. So well, we don't know very much, but we know a lot about the school, which was founded just some years before he arrived there. And he arrived and he immediately got a very good scholarship, which is quite funny because this was a scholarship meant for German people from the region of Augsburg, poor people destined also for an ecclesiastical career, and he does not at all fit into this program of the scholarship. I think it was this kind of protectionism, and I think his father, as a high military officer in Venice, we don't know what he actually really did in Venice, his father, but he must have had good contacts. And there was Matthäus Welser from the famous Welser family, equally famous as the Fugger in Augsburg. So they were the two families kind of in charge of the place. And this Matteo Welser was head of the Fondaco dei Tedeschi in Venice, the German trade center. And his brother, Matteo Welser was the brother in Augsburg, and the guy in Venice was Marx or Marcus Welser. And I think they just somehow agreed, we sent this boy there. He's very talented, he's very intelligent. And we give him these scholarships, which does not have anything to do with his life style or whatever. It's a little bit strange, and I really hope that people find out more about that. Margaret, maybe you can show the first picture. Yes. So that is a document where Kapsberger writes, he gets his scholarship in 4 parts every year. And he always writes a kind of confirmation that he received the money. What we see here, it's, maybe you can make it even a little bit bigger so that we see the signature. You see, it says, so it's the German, no, that's the next picture. Maybe you can still see it.
I try to make it bigger, just a second.
Very good.
Yeah.
It actually looks the same, but what you see is there is a signature. It says Johannes Hieronymus Kapsberger, and it's really his own hand, and this is maybe the earliest signature we know. It's from 1594, so he was about 14 years then. The letter for sure is written by somebody else, but the signature is his. And we have this confirmation letters for some years for him, so that's quite important new material on Kapsberger. It's quite funny that we don't know why he left and how he left. Suddenly in 1596, after like 5 or 6 years in Augsburg, he leaves the school. He does not take his scholarship anymore. and he's even called that he flew from the school, like if the boy is fugitive, they say. It looks as if for Jesuit education, if you stop the education, they use these terms. It does not mean that you did something bad, or that you had to run, or that you really ran away because you fell in love with some girl and you left school. I don't think that we are talking about this, but he stopped his education at the Jesuit gymnasium, and I guess he went back to Italy, and maybe he already went to Rome, but we don't know that for sure. If you saw enough, it's just a beautiful image of a very, very beautifully written document in the Stadtarchiv in Augsburg. Maybe you can close it again, Margaret. So it's a big surprise for us that he was in Augsburg, because we all know that his music is so Italian and so modern. And Augsburg at this time in the late 16th century was, musically speaking, a rather conservative place. There were some famous musicians who had also studied in Italy, but still it's not like growing up in Italy, and it's a very different influence than actually I think we all thought he might have had in his youth. I don't know if you agree, the people who know his music. I think for me this is a big surprise, and we also don't really know when he really started to play the theorbo, because in Augsburg I think the theorbo at the time had not really arrived. Maybe in Venice, even if the same, you know, that there were these German instrument builders traveling Europe and coming from Füssen, which is very close to Augsburg, there might have been lots of contact. But I think the theorbo is in this early time, it's still an Italian phenomenon. Don't know what the theorbo players think about that. But that's one of the big surprises. So Kapsberger was educated in Augsburg. We don't know where he went then. My hypothesis is that he went to Rome, but I cannot prove it. The next trace we have is in Naples. So we are already quite, he's not even, now he's 24 when you find him in Naples. And he has already had quite a, you know, it was not a globalized world then. So he already saw a lot of the world more than other people. We find him in Naples, where his first daughter is born in 1604. The daughter is called Dorothea, and so he must already have been married with Girolamo de Rossi, his Neapolitan wife, who was still alive when he died. So they really shared lots of time together. Also, Naples is a very nice, it's not a surprise, this is known since, I think, 10 years. But still, it explains lots of Neapolitan features in his music. Also, lots of titles of his pieces, like the Caponata or the Sfessaina, and there's lots of also these pieces with the Commedia dell'arte. There's lots of Neapolitan elements in his music, and maybe we also can. For the vocal music, you all know that we have these prints with the alfabeto for the chitarra spagnola, for the Baroque guitar. And he was actually the first to publish this in print with vocal music. So this is maybe also coming, he was he knew this technique very well from his years in Naples. We also can presume that he met Gesualdo. Gesualdo was in this, you all know that Gesualdo was in exile at that moment because he had killed his wife and her lover. So he was at the countryside, like 100 kilometers from Naples, but he was in very close contact with the musical scene in Naples, and Gesualdo himself played the lute, and I think he would not have wanted to miss a brilliant young theorbo player who was freshly arrived in Naples somehow. So we see lots of different influences already, from Augsburg to Naples and Venice as the first years of his life. We don't know how long he lived in Naples. We have the information actually only because of this birth certificate of his daughter. And that's also quite interesting to me, because when I did my artistic PhD, my professors very often said, why do you do all this archive work? You need to work on the music. But if we don't have this information that his daughter was born there, we don't even know that he lived there for years maybe. So, and it tells us so much about the music. I hope you agree that's kind of, it's like putting things together and then not leave it on a biographical level, but really see what it did to his music. Any questions so far? Maybe that's a first good moment.
Sorry, so we don't have any document telling us if he was already playing before leaving Venice to go to Augsburg. There is no, okay.
No. The first document we have on him as a musician is the first print, the first book for the theorbo, which was published in June 1604. His daughter was born in January 1604 in Naples. And okay. Until we had all this new biographical information, if you read the older articles on Kapsberger, you will all read that he was in Venice, and on the wings of his first success, like the print of the first book, then he moved to Rome. And that's just not true at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask as well a question? But yes. do we know in this concern, how was the musical education in Augsburg in general? What was part of the Jesuit education?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. Actually, it was a very strict education, and maybe you know the Jesuits in Rome, they had lots of music and they had a big musical culture. And Kapsberger himself in 1623, he composed a big piece for the Jesuits with lots of musicians on stage. It's the apotheosis of Francis Xavier and Ignatius from Loyola, because they were canonized on that in this year, and they threw a big party. The apotheosis has like 5 acts and was performed by the students of the college and the best musicians of Rome, it says. But in Germany, the Jesuits, they were very severe when it came to music, and also the general, there was some guy traveling from Jesuit school to Jesuit school, telling them that they really were not allowed to play any music except for this very strict sacred music. So I think they sang every day, but for using an organ, they had to ask extra permission. So I think we can exclude that he had lessons in school. They had a kind of chapel master, and I think for the big festivities there was music, but it must have been quite a severe surrounding. Speaking about music, we don't know. Of course, there were brilliant lute players in Augsburg, like Melchior Neusiedler, but Melchior Neusiedler at the time he was already quite sick. He died soon afterwards, but maybe he had lessons with his brother. I'd be extremely grateful if somebody in Augsburg would start a big research and try to see if you can find something. But we need to hope for that somehow. This is also why I'm glad that I finally managed to publish the book, so the information is out and everybody can start moving with the information which is there and with all the documents. But that's everything we know. So it's actually a surprising surrounding for a composer like Kapsberger to have been in a kind of austere environment, speaking about music, maybe not just about music. We know things about education, and it's also, I quoted lots of this in my book because it's quite interesting to see how he grew up. And it's really very strict, very religious, very much like this. Maybe this also made him want something else and made him leave Augsburg. We don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Next, we find him in Rome, and Rome is going to be the place where he then built up his career and where he stayed. Latest in 1606, he lives in Rome together with his wife, and they live, I don't know who knows Rome better. They live just behind Piazza Navona, and they had several addresses in those 40 years until his death. And I managed to identify one house where he lived in the late 1630s to mid 1640s, which is just next to Palazzo Farnese. All this information is also in the book, and anyway, whoever then has questions afterwards, please feel free. Maybe Margaret can put my email in the chat. And then whoever has more specific questions, I'm very happy to share what I know. In Rome, it's interesting to see that so he was a nobleman. Maybe it was not very high nobility, but he was a nobleman and he had a coat of arms. This is also how I found him in Augsburg, because he used his coat of arms. He had a ring. They sent the 10-year-old Kapsberger to Augsburg with a Siegelring. What's that in English? So where you sign with, you know what I mean?
Signet ring.
Yes.
Signet ring.
Yes, thank you. Ah, hello, Liz.
Hello.
And so he was very proud of being a nobleman, and of course, being a nobleman and a professional musician at this time just did not go together. And all those musicians like Sigismondo d'India, Bellerofonte Castaldi, or Kapsberger, or also Wassenaar, van Wassenaar in the Dutch countries, we have very different strategies. We see different strategies of how they handle this. Kapsberger, I think he was quite radical. He was not very much loved by his fellow musicians because of this. We have an ironic poem by Castaldi on him, where he says that, he does not need to work, so he always has his prints published by somebody else, which indeed is true. Kapsberger did only publish prints himself in the late 1620s, when he dedicated them to the family of the Pope. So that was good enough for him. But otherwise, he published always saying, my mind is so, no, he always had an editor saying that his mind is so busy with higher things. He's not publishing himself, but we don't want to, we love his music, we want to show it, we want to play it. So please, I give it as a gift back to him, and we should all be happy. And there are always poems saying that Kapsberger had to choose between Apollo and Mars, so between a military career and between arts and music, and he chose music. But it looks as if this was more a show somehow, because he had to earn money. I think he must have been also not wealthy, but well off. But he earned lots of money, and he was very good in earning money. We have quite some documents about, amusing documents, calling him quite greedy, and saying that he really would not teach for less money. He was one of the best paid teachers in Rome for decades, so he earns money all the time. He published his prints also to sell them to his pupils, and he asks lots of money for this. So that's also quite interesting to see if you do lots of research, then you get closer to a person. When I started my research, I thought, wow, Kapsberger, my idol. And then you see that he's very human in the end. And maybe in the end, I discovered things which I did not like to discover very much. Yes, more questions? No. So maybe now we move a little bit faster, because now we come to this time where I think you all know he published lots of books. He had a quite big success also in Rome as a player. But he concentrated on playing private concerts. We don't see him in any of those big performances in Rome where all the famous musicians played together. He did not participate in that, I think on purpose, because he wanted to keep his noble status. He already started, I also find interesting the kind of prints he publishes when. So he starts with a book for the theorbo. The next print is the book with madrigals for 5 singers and basso continuo. And this also maybe shows us that he was a very educated man, using this like his Visitenkarte, madrigals were very much in fashion in the 16th century. And if you then in the early 17th century publish a print with madrigals, it's also a kind of, you show where you stand, you show that you're an educated composer. And that's also very interesting. I don't know if any of you saw the madrigals, because they give you a completely different idea of Kapsberger as a composer than the theorbo music. It's very well composed, it's very well structured. It's like a mix between Gesualdo and completely homophonic music. He shows that he's able to compose polyphony. He uses lots of word painting and effects and madrigalisms like Gesualdo does. But then he also shows that he's bringing something new. And very often you have a phrase which is just sung by 5 people, like with one mouth, pronouncing the text at the same time. And that's a completely different feature from what we have in the Renaissance madrigal. And that's also something which Kapsberger loves to do later in his bigger pieces. We have, he produced some very big staged works in the 1620s for the Pope, and also, as I just said before, for the Jesuits. And there you have chorus speaking poetry in a new style, and they just sang it together, which to us now seems maybe less interesting than Renaissance polyphony, because it's just like singing together at the same time. But at that period, it was a sensation. And it's also, we have statements that people, finally they understood the poetry and the rhythm of the verses and stuff like this. So Kapsberger always tried to be very, very modern. And he already states that with his first prints. He then built up a really beautiful career. I think he had his own academia in his house. He had lots of pupils, also pupils who then worked functioned like patrons for him. And he always got higher in the intellectual circles, also because he was a very educated man. He was not just a musician. It feels bad to say this in our time, but he was very proud of being in contact with writers, poets, artists, philosophers, scientists. It's this period where the academia, the academic culture was central for the cultural life of this period. So you had an academia for poetry, you had an academia for theater, and it was or for natural science, and everybody wanted to participate in something like this, and they were all showing off how clever and educated they were. And I think this is something we need to also to try to understand when we think about the music of this time. And Kapsberger, on one hand, he had his own musical academy where I think people played together. His students also played together, but they were all from the good society. And then we had academies like the Accademia degli Umoristi, which is maybe the most famous Roman academy, mostly speaking about literature, but also about different sorts of art. You had to be a nobleman to be able to enter this academy. So it's a very different idea from like what we think now, that it's not birth who gives us the right to participate in a wonderful project, but it's what we learn and what we do. And in this period, it was still, it could be quite different. And then there was the Accademia dei Lincei, which is which was an academy for natural science, which maybe also now we think about something else than this was, but they spoke a lot about experiments, and they had regular meetings. Galileo Galilei was a member of this academy, and it was a big honor to be a member of this academy. Kapsberger was not a member of the Lincei, but he was close friends with many of these members. And in 1623, Cardinal Maffeo Barberini was elected to be Pope. His name as a Pope was Urbano VIII, and he was a key figure for Kapsberger's career. And then when he was elected Pope, Kapsberger even published a book with poems of the new Pope, which he had musicated. And that was a very clever strategical move. And from then on, Kapsberger was one of the favorites of the papal family in Rome. And you know, then this means it's not just Rome, but it's the Vatican. The Vatican State now is small, but then it was also a huge reign, like of the Catholic Church. Maybe it's again a good moment for questions, because I'm just rolling off.
There are questions in the chat.
Exactly, we have a question in the chat, which
I don't have the chat open.
It says, do you know what these pupils were learning, theorbo, lute, or composition?
Yes, that's something where I thought we would come to a little bit later, but we can also just speak about it now. It's already for some years that we know that he had theorbo students, but I had the big luck to discover a huge collection of letters in the State Archive in Pisa, letters from 1647-48, which is at the end of Kapsberger's life. He was already an old and very sick man by the time, and these are letters from Rome to Pisa, from the Roman agents to a patron who lived in Pisa. This patron he took a young castrato in his service, whose name was Raffaello Mellini, who then in the end did not make a big career, but the patron paid for his musical education. The guy was 14 when he started. And Kapsberger was his teacher for half a year, and Kapsberger was his maestro in this way that they were teaching them. So he was teaching him singing, counterpoint, harpsichord, theorbo, and guitar. And that's another very nice surprise. I always get the question, why do you as a harpsichord player do all this research on Kapsberger? And it's very nice for me to have a confirmation in the end that Kapsberger himself was able to play the harpsichord, and that he was just a musician with a bigger ambitus, like in his mind. And so from these letters, we can also deduce the names of many people who studied with Kapsberger, singers, and mainly singers, because they also discuss about the quality of Kapsberger's teaching lessons, because Kapsberger is always asking more and more money. And the Roman agent of the patron, he says, now it's really getting too much, it's really getting too much. And then they also ask other people their opinion about Kapsberger's teaching, and they ask former students. And then they say, I love him, he's my beloved teacher. And maybe at the moment, he's not that modern anymore, but he's just such a wonderful musician and gentiluomo. I'm now, we have really hundreds of pages of these letters, and I'm like making the information very small at the moment. It's a little bit generalizing. So we know that he was really teaching much more than just the theorbo. Unfortunately, this castrato, he was not dotated to play the theorbo. He was not talented to play the theorbo, and he was not interested in it. And then he only had lessons with Kapsberger for like half a year. So they were extremely busy with many other things. But from these letters, we also know that Kapsberger, he also sold them a theorbo. He sold them at least 2 books of vocal music. They started, funnily enough, they started with the aria, which is very complicated and very virtuosistic music. And only after some months, they started with the villanelle. We would do it opposite. And maybe for the theorbo players, it's also interesting that the theorbo he tried to sell, no, he did not only try, he succeeded in selling them. It was the end of his life, and after a huge career, he was obviously in financial crisis, and he tried to get money wherever he could. So he sold his instruments, it seems. And this theorbo was built by a maestro Matteo, and they were at the, like Kapsberger said, they are hard to find, and they are very, very good instruments. And I think it's Matteo Buchenberg, but I cannot really prove it. But there are several connections to Buchenberg, because that's also a question for the theorbo players. I think that like, what did he really play? Whose instruments did he play? I also see in the chat that Kapsberger's music examples were also published in Kircher's Musogia Universalis, which is also another proof that he was appreciated as a composer, and not just as a theorbo player. If I say just as a theorbo player, I know that you understand that I don't mean something bad with it. It's just like opening our mind that Kapsberger was a musician and composer and teacher, and we only have seen just a tiny bit of his capacities so far if we just see him as a theorbo player. More questions?
I have a question, please.
Yeah.
It was written that you said that the name of the theorbo builder was Matteo. It's the only information you have, only Matteo.
Yes,
okay.
That's the only information I have, but I have the information that a patron and friend of Kapsberger, whose name is Filippo Niccolini, he was a Florentine nobleman. He was the publisher of the first lute book in 1611. Yes. They were both quite young men then, but they stayed also from these letters from Pisa. Niccolini is mentioned there as Kapsberger's amico, like 37 years later. So I think they must have been in close contact. And this Niccolini owned Liuto Attiorbato by Buchenberg. We know this because of a donation he donated it to somebody, and it's described in detail also. I think the instrument must have been lost. This instrument had the coat of arms of the Medici. It's like this kind of small globes, balls, several of them, and in one of those there was the coat of arms of Niccolini. I don't think that this instrument has survived, but I think that most of the editors of Kapsberger's books, who published the books for him, that they were pupils, rich pupils who then acted as a patron, also showing their own interest in arts and their good education. And so it was a win-win situation for both, for Kapsberger as the teacher and for them as people who wanted to show to the high society that they were patrons of the best music ever, kind of.
Anne-Marie,
Yeah.
couldn't it be Matteo Sellas, the famous?
Yes. It could be Matteo Sellas.
I thought.
But I think Matteo Sellas was working in Matteo Buchenberg's workshop for some years in Rome. But I think the Buchenberg connection is a little bit more probable because they lived also, it's like 5 minutes on foot between Kapsberger's different addresses and Buchenberg's workshop. I think it's not excluded that it's Matteo Sellas, but also with this Nicolini connection, I think it could be, to me, it leads a little bit into this direction, but you as a lute player, you will have other ways of thought, maybe.
Yeah.
We have this as Yuval is pointing out. I was thinking to Sellas because we have this 18 course theorbo surviving by him, and we all know that Kapsberger published for the 19 course theorbo. So
yeah, we also know that there was this student of Kapsberger's from Brussels. I don't know if you already know there are letters from the court in Brussels to the ambassador in Rome, because there was a young lute player, Philippe Vermeulen was his name, from Brussels, sent to actually he was not sent, he on his own, he decided he wanted to go to Rome and to learn the theorbo. Then he arrived there, he goes to the ambassador and says, hello, here I am. I don't have money, I don't know with whom I should study, but so please help me. And then he got the court, the Brussels court, they paid for his education. He wanted to study with Piccinini because he had been in Flanders before together with Frescobaldi, but Piccinini had left the city. So then the ambassador made inquiries and he discovered Kapsberger, calling him the Allemand de la theorbe, and then he studied with Kapsberger, and I think really like kind of locked in a room, and he's making good progress because he's practicing all day. It's one of these cases where there are some comments on if you should first be perfect on the lute and then start playing the theorbo, or if you should start with the theorbo before being perfect on the lute. And that's quite interesting for the lute players maybe. And when he left Rome, he also left with 2 big instruments which he had ordered to bring to the court in Brussels. There is a big instrument by Buchenberg, I think, in the museum in Brussels, but I asked in the museum and they said it does not come from the court. So it's hard to follow those lines. Maybe that could also be a very nice research project for a theorbo player. More questions? So maybe then, yeah.
Anne-Marie, yeah, I have one. I think it's astonishing to see how many of the virtuosi of the time were also multi-instrumentalists and general polymaths, eclectic figures who were able to shift from an instrument to another, together with being composers, teachers, etc., as you said. So how much evidence do we have of him playing harpsichord, and did he regularly teach it, or rather, basically, how skilled was he in cembalo playing?
That's something we don't know at all. I just think if he had to teach the harpsichord, then it will have been on a certain level. But I think then also teaching the harpsichord means teaching counterpoint, teaching basic basso continuo.
Yeah.
There is a quote in one of those letters saying that he did not only bring out good pupils on the theorbo, lute, and singers, but also basso continuo players on different instruments.
Okay.
Again, that's something where we can only hope that we find more evidence. What we know also from these letters are that he was an excellent singer. And I think this is very interesting also for the basso continuo style, and also for the information on basso continuo that we have in his books, because there's another quote in one of these letters where he really says that the theorbo is the perfect instrument to accompany the voice. And I think in this, he in the late 1640s, he's actually quite old-fashioned, but he comes from this comes from his youth, where it was the ideal. And of course it works perfectly well, but maybe not for the kind of music which started to be modern. So we know that the quote says that he was, even if already an old man, he's singing in such exquisite style that the person who writes the letter gets more pleasure out of listening to him than of listening to the most famous singers of Rome. And I think that is very important for us to know. So we should really see his vocal music as much as his own music, and his world as the theorbo music and the lute music. About the harpsichord, I think that's important for me because it gives me a kind of better feeling that I spent like 2 decades of my life with him, and I discover a connection with the harpsichord. But we know that his daughters, he had 9 children, of whom 6 died when they were very small, but 2 daughters survived, and they stayed with him until he died. I think he was not a very nice father, maybe. He seems to have been quite a patriarch. This is also what we can deduce from these letters. But those 2 daughters must have been brilliant musicians. And when he was, because he had a gout, he was very sick at the end of his life. He was always in pain. He could not move to the 2nd floor of his house because he had such pain in his legs. And when he was tired, the daughters were teaching the castrato instead of him. So that's also a very new information, because they were the daughters of a nobleman, even if maybe not so noble. There's also a quote in these letters that he said he does not have enough money to marry them well, like according to their status. So he prefers to keep them in the house, which also, we should never forget that it's different times we're speaking about. I think it was normal at the time, but for me as a woman, it really makes me,
freak us out. I think it's so interesting that you know, you mentioned all these skills intertwining each other, and you know, to see all these singers, players, for example. I think it's something that it's not so common, or maybe it's not always common in all the educational paths here in Europe, especially. So to see this, I think it's really important also for us as musicians to connect with that mindset, music mindset, I think. So thank you so much.
No, I also really think that knowing that he was a friend of poets and he was a singer himself, if you play his vocal music and you just play your parts, you miss the most important bit. You really have to try to understand the language. You have to really understand, to picture all the effects in your continuo playing, as if you would sing and play at the same time. If you're able to do that, please do it. But if you're not, then you have to participate with everything you have. And also about the harp, I know Margaret finds that very interesting. There's a small thing connecting him with harp in I spoke about this Filippo Niccolini, the editor of the first lute book. He was then, he lived in Rome for a while in the early 17th century, but then he went to Florence, where he came from. And he was in a very high position at the court, and he was very closely connected with Giovancarlo de' Medici, who was not the Prince of Florence, but he was a younger brother. He was designed for a military career, but then the Medici cardinal of the family died. And Giovancarlo had to jump in, even if he did not want to. He was one of those guys who really had a very rich life, life full of pleasures with lots of mistresses and lots of good food. And he's also rumored to have died early because of his lifestyle. So he, even being a cardinal, he kind of stick to that, but he really loved arts, and he was an important music patron. And Kapsberger, via this Niccolini, they were in close contact. And Kapsberger, he sent strings to this cardinal, and he also received money for a young harpist in 1636. I think it's 3 payments. First, it's like a present to a young harpist, and then in the second 2 payments, it's explained that this guy is supposed to build a harp. So a harp has to be built for this young man. And in total, he gets 138.20 scudi. The Barberini harp seems to have cost 125, which is 15 scudi less. And if you all know what a precious instrument it is, one would love to see the harp which has been built for this young harp player, of whom we don't know the name. And one asks, or at least I ask myself, how much provision how much percent did Kapsberger keep for himself? Knowing like he arranged the patron to pay for the harp, I'm sure he kept quite a bit of this money for himself. Still, it must have been a very nice harp, and we don't know anything about it. We don't know who it was, but it could also lead us into this direction that Kapsberger was like a universal teacher for all basso continuo instruments, or for all the harmony instruments of this period. Now he did not even die. First he was not born, now he did not even die. And an hour is nearly gone. So I think we left the biographical chronology quite quickly, but maybe it's more interesting for you like that. So I know that following something online, and also for me speaking online, it's very different from a normal lecture in front of people. I don't know how you feel, if you think this was enough and we have more questions, or if there's any issue where you think you would still want to hear like 10 minutes of chaotic talk by me.
Annemarie, I would like to ask you also something, because you also mentioned the career of Kapsberger in Naples. Mm-hmm. So as today I'm also with my students, it would be super interesting, as Naples was like the most important city for harp in this period. Was there also a connection, like for example with Trabaci, Maione, who have also been like these universal musicians, teaching, playing organ? Is there some connection that you could imagine? And also the same question for Rome, as we already have been talking, if there would be, or maybe I let you first answer for Naples.
Well, it's actually a short and sad answer. We just don't know. We just don't know at all. We know that he was there, and we really only have this birth certificate. We know the parish where he lived. We don't know the precise address, but it's in the very center. That's everything we know. I tried to find out more about the family of his wife, who also was a noblewoman, but it's De Rossi, and it's a huge family with many branches, and even with the coat of arms, I just did not succeed to get more information. I also spoke with many people who are specialists of this in Naples, and they could not help. So I think we have to live with it, that for the moment there is no information. We can try to find the traces in his music, and I think we find them, but we don't know more. again, this is like asking for people trying. I have to add that Neapolitan archives are even more difficult than many other archives because they have very strange opening times and very strange rules. Very often you have to go there, you order like 3 documents. You are not allowed to order more. They don't give you lots of material, so you have to plan like a month in order to see what you could see in another place in a week. And that was very difficult, I have to say. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. So we know there is would be an interesting field for research. And another question would be like, let's imagine now Rome in the 30s or even before. And you mentioned also the Barberini harp, which was built like 4 years before this other harp, which we know nothing about, was built for Marco Marazzoli. So Marco Marazzoli was the most famous harp player because the Barberini harp was built for him. But there was also Orazio Michi in Rome, who also is an interesting figure because he also, like, we have no composition for harp solo, but a lot of vocal music. Do you know something about, could they have known each other, or do we have something?
I think with Miki, it's clear that they must have known each other because they both worked for the Barberini family. And even if Kapsberger was already, he was very famous until the early 1630s. And then there was the process of Galileo. And Kapsberger had been so close to this Accademia dei Lincei and to many people connected with them who had been in high positions at the papal court. With the process of Galileo, it was really upheaval. So who had a good job lost it, and the opposite. And in the other composers in favor were not affected because they were not in these intellectual circles. But Kapsberger was really very much connected with that. And I think this is the reason, or one of the reasons why he published so much until 1632, and then suddenly there's a black hole kind of. He still worked for the Barberini, but only with a very small salary and no extra performances. Like we know very much about this for the years before, like around 1630. Still, I think they made kind of private music for the cardinals, and Kapsberger must have played with them. And there was Frescobaldi, Kapsberger, and Miki, who were the famous threesome somehow. It's impossible that Miki and Kapsberger did not know each other and also make music together, I'd say. With Marazzoli, I think he is the new generation. But for example, Marazzoli was then again in close contact with this Filippo Niccolini, about whom I have already spoken a bit. And I think there are many, many possible connections, but again, that's something to be researched. Marazzoli was also playing in many productions, in the bigger productions, which is a thing Kapsberger never did because he was a nobleman and he was not, he did not want to appear in one of these lists. It seems like in the opera productions, this was not interesting for him, or maybe he tried, maybe he thought that it would ruin his status. I think there's still very, very much to be researched, and the problem is that we don't know if we look for it, if we find it, but still I think we have to try.
Great, thank you.
More questions?
Yes, I have one, please. I have the Villanelle, all the books of Villanelle, different years, and I didn't find the name of the poets.
Yes, that's what most of the composers at the time did not write the names of the poets if they did not maybe write poems themselves. like there are some examples where like Bartolomeo, help me, Barberino. There's I just have if we come to my mind, there are some composers who were also poets.
Yes.
So like Castaldi, he gives names of poets because he's very conscious about that. Kapsberger never wrote the name of a poet, but there are people who are doing research on it, and actually there are quite some poems which are identified. What I also know from the letters in Pisa, that Kapsberger maybe wrote his own poems and made music with them, because there's a quote which makes it very clear in one of those letters. I think it's if you're a person moving in these intellectual circles, then it's part of your identity that you sit down and you write a small poem, and then if you're a composer, you can also make music. I think that's normal, but it was not also copyright at this period, just did not exist.
Yes.
In Kapsberger's case, we know that he worked very much with Giovanni Ciampoli, who was a Florentine, a famous poet actually, but he was also the secretary of briefs of Pope Urban VIII. And he was actually maybe the person highest in favor before the process of Galileo, and then he was even banned from Rome. It's a very complex story. It's very, very hard to kind of tell that in 2 sentences. But I think Kapsberger and Ciampoli first were a duo of success, also doing big productions for the paper court, and then they fell together from favor. Ciampoli fell lower, but Kapsberger also he just lost importance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, I also have a question. It's a very light question, but maybe it can help us to see Kapsberger music in a more complete way. Especially in the 4th book, we have these dances or these elements, musical elements coming apparently from popular music, from traditional music. And on this basis, and also on other biographical details, there's also the image of Kapsberger as a man who was acquainted also with the low part of society, let's say like this. The tavern frequentation, is this true or is this not? Because from your picture, we only have this very high image, very cultivated man, and not dealing with this kind of Caravagesque image we all have about Kapsberger.
I think he himself, I'm sure he must have gone to the tavern as everybody else did, but I think he really liked to keep his high image. And if we see these popular themes, then we should not forget that they were popular also on the courts, at the courts. So also the Pope liked to listen to a nice Chacona, or maybe I think it's also the Villanelle. Somehow I feel it's not so much popular music. It's a little bit like a different attitude of vocal music. When I chose for the book, when I chose the image, do you see it? An art historian said to me, "It's very nice, but you're leading people into the wrong direction." He really thinks that Kapsberger was so noble that this image gives us a wrong idea. And I don't know myself actually. What I can imagine that this strong separation we have between popular and noble, that it was not that much like this in this period. And I think also we know that the Baroque guitar, for example, it started with popular music in the 16th century, but then it had a huge rise to the highest. Thank you. To the highest level somehow, and also the princes, the nephews of Pope Urbano, they had guitar lessons because it was just very much en vogue somehow. I really like this picture very much because you have all the instruments of a continuo group, so you all find yourself in this picture. You also think about Agazzari saying that the violin can also play continuo, maybe. And we have a lady singing, which could be one of the daughters of Kapsberger. She's playing the harpsichord, and we have the boys singing. So for me, it's kind of all there. But it's true that this is more like Devon style and doesn't give a very noble image.
Yes. Yeah. No, please.
No, it's again one of these questions where I say it's interesting to think about it, but it's very hard to give a clear answer. Somehow, I would think Kapsberger, he was very ambitious to keep his status, and he was very careful. So I think he would not want to have been seen in this way, somehow.
Because the question is, I totally agree with you that Villanelle is clearly an exercise in pseudo popular music, and this is everywhere like this. But what is interesting, I think, in the fourth book we have these forms we don't have anywhere else.
Yes.
So this is really, of course, the Neapolitan hint is a very interesting thing you said in the first part of your lecture. But also the question is where he became acquainted to this kind of dances, because from some of them we don't have traces anywhere else.
I think this must be from Naples. I have the feeling that maybe at the end of his life, it was his last print for the theorbo, and maybe he put some good old stuff out of his manuscripts. We also know from the letters in Pisa that his house was packed with manuscripts. So I think we have lost so much music because we don't know where this all went to somehow. Yeah. It's I think he must have been also a very quick composer. Yeah. More questions? I'm a bit sorry for Margaret, to whom I sent some pictures which I did not show now, but maybe we find another. What I wanted to maybe just briefly, Michele is going to speak about the Passaggi for the theorbo in his lecture, and I just wanted to briefly say that these realizations we have in Aria and Villanelle, it's in total, it's 3 books where we have the realizations for the theorbo. I find them very interesting also for players of another instrument. We know now that Kapsberger, he sold his music to his pupils, and I think they have a strong pedagogical idea behind them. And we don't have many descriptions of him playing, but there's one very nice quote actually by this poet Ciampoli, where he describes Kapsberger when he played in the coronation ceremony of Pope Urbano. He says with Alemanno furor, and he speaks about the low strings. And I think if we imagine that, and if we see the realizations, maybe the realizations are something which you can easily play while you sing. If you just play and somebody else is singing, I'm sure you can add lots of interesting features like the things Michele is going to speak about later. But there's this one piece, Lasso ch'io ardo, in the first book of Arie Passeggiati, where we find something which I find extremely interesting because we have so little practical information on basso continuo of this early time. We have harpsichord treatises, we have realizations for the theorbo, also for other stuff, but it's all quite basic. I don't know what the harpists think about very early continuo material. Like Agazzari is wonderful because he's using such a rich language to describe sounds, but he does not really give you lots of information. You can just sit down and play. And there's one example, maybe Margaret, if we have the time, could you open the Lasso ch'io ardo, the facsimile? Yes. And now if we go down 2 lines, one more. Yes, so you see that there is exactly where Margaret, where her cursor is, there's a line going down in the voice. Ella non pur che il creda. It's a sad song somehow. And we have this feature, it's about, again, it's like always about love and unhappy love. We have this passage here, and Michele and the theorbo players, they will immediately see that in the basso continuo realization, he's just playing two voices and he's doubling the soprano line. This, in this spot of the poem, he's more like describing a situation. Can we go down a page and look for the same element, because it's coming back. It's a piece with 3 verses. Down, here. Here we have it again. The line going down, and now he's still sticking to 2 notes, but he's re-attacking the dissonance. So it's not da da di against the bass note, but dum di dum da dim di da. So strengthening the dissonance. The text is al fonte di pietà trovar mercede. So you hope to find mercy at the fountain of pietà. Give me the English word. It's about finding mercy. So it's a little bit more urgent. And then if we go down again, 1 page. I think it's already here in the first line. Here we have strong chords against the soprano line. You have the soprano line is kind of left alone in this languishing slurs against the syncopated slurs, and against this you have it's 1 line. It's 2 lines lower. Margaret, please could you go down? It's here at the stop. Rimaner. Now I don't see it very well because my face is on top of it in the. But in this spot we have the
yes, it's the right one. It's the first line we see at the end. Yes, exactly. But
yes. And here we have again the same musical materials for the singer and the bass line, but we have a 3rd version for the realization, which is strong chord against this lamenting syncopated line. And we have a text where he says, just before this, he speaks about her cold tongue and her eyes are closed, and now he stays alone with his suffering, kind of, he or she, we don't know. And I find this extremely interesting because I don't know many examples where we have different realization for different situations with the text and with the story going on somehow. And it's just a small detail, but I find it extremely interesting. And I think it's really worth for us to study these realizations to find small important hints like this, which just give us more clues about how to paint certain effects in music. Yes, that would be my small practical bits. Maybe just to finish here, and now that was very quick, and I hope you understood what I wanted to show. If there are questions, please ask. No?
We don't have a question. I think on this point, we will later, for the workshop, we will also look a little bit to this example, but maybe we could do a small break now, I think, if you agree.
You really deserve it. I have been shooting you with information and we have been jumping around a bit also because of the questions. But what I wanted to say at the end is this is the book. I think you can order it online, but it's only in German at the moment. Whoever feels that this is a huge problem for his future life, please write to the editor. I am in contact with them about translations, and I think they want to do it, but it's a slow process and they need to finance it. So either you have a rich uncle who would love to offer paying for the translation, or you just write to them a short email saying, I heard that there's this book and I would be so happy. For Italian or for English, I think both would be nice to do, but it's going to be a long process until we have it. But we have to start it, and I have the perfect person to translate it in English. Actually, he would love to start translating now, but without an okay from the editor, it's not going to work. So whoever wants to actively write to the editor, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
And Anne-Marie, thank you very much. Just a question. Can you please paste the editor email to the chat, so we all know that we can do it?
I'll look for it and I'll paste it after the break.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very funny, like this online feeling, because I still feel that I can see a little bit your faces and your expressions, and I thank you for your attention and your smiles.
Thank you so much.
Danke.
Interesting, and it's really a great book, and we all should write a lot of letters with different names. So yeah, it's super interesting, and also really very interesting for harpists to look at these examples for the realization of the lute, because of course we can learn so much about it, about in the aesthetical way of view and so many other levels. Thank you very much, and see you after. I would suggest like coffee break, 15 minutes.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. So Michele, the word is yours.
So I'm very happy to do this lecture after Anne-Marie brilliant presentation of Kapsberger as a composer, and we know much more thanks to her work. So I can go directly to the sources and see what Kapsberger writes about, especially about continuum. And it will be my lecture will be called Passaggi per suonare sopra la parte, which actually is the title of a part of Kapsberger's third book, Terzo libro di chitarrone. It's the last part of this book, and my aim is to compare Kapsberger, Passaggi per suonare sopra la parte, with two important manuscripts for theorbo. We have, which is the Modena manuscript and the New York manuscript. Everything will be also in modern notation, so everybody can follow. And I especially have in mind, of course, being a guest of Harfenlabor, the connection, the possible connection between theorbo and harp. So I would like to start from a question. Can we separate in the theorbo literature theorbo solo playing from continuo playing? This is the question I would like to start from. We all know that theorbo is an instrument born for continuo. With the first publication of solo music for theorbo is, of course, Kapsberger 1604. But the first witnesses of theorbo used as an instrument in a continuo ensemble is 20 years before, from Caccini and a few years later from Peri. So theorbo existed as a continuo instrument probably before being recognized as a solo instrument, and Kapsberger as a key role in this. So we all know that Caccini accompanied himself on the theorbo because this was the dream of the intellectuals in Florence, and not only, to recreate the power of an ancient Greek monody. By the way, I'm in Greece right now, so I'm entitled to speak about it. No, it's so theorbo existed as a solo instrument probably before having a career as a solo instrument. And this is not so evident, of course, because all the other instruments we know, it's quite exactly the opposite. So theorbo it looks like being an instrument created for the continuo. My question is, of course, if the praxis of continuo and the praxis of solo playing are separated or not. We, of course, have the intabulated continuo publications, which are not many, but they are very important. Of course, the Kapsberger books, Il libro di arie passeggiate, and the other book, the Motetti Passaggiati, and also the Villanelle book, and then we have the Salomone Rossi publication with the Chitarrone Obbligato, Flaminio Corradi, who has a Chitarrone Obbligato, and of course Bellerofonte Castaldi, which is very important for us because, of course, it was a prominent theorbo player who also published solo music for theorbo. This is more or less what we have, if I don't forget something, as a source of intabulated continuo on the theorbo. So it's adaptable what the author wants you to do with these pieces. Yet we have to pose us a question, which I think is a key one. What the author wanted this intabulated continuo be? So why did he publish continuo in realization, a continuo realization? This is a question I will come again on it at the end of my speech. Now I just wanted to point out that, as we saw from Anne-Marie, very interesting example, Lasso Chioardo, as you already saw from this example, the realization of the continuum is not naive at all, but it's, on the other hand, it's not incredibly demanding from the point of view of technique. I think that one of the things said Anne-Marie is already a very important hint. So she said, was it meant, if it was meant for a person playing and singing together, it's just perfect. But if it's meant for a person, for two different persons, maybe the other person would like to add something more to this realization, or maybe, to put it in another way, we would expect that a virtuoso like Kapsberger would put something more. So are we a little bit disappointed by his realization? The relatively simple realization we find in these intabulations led some of the modern scholars to have a very strong position on continuo at the beginning of the 17th century. And now we'll start, I would like to present as an example of this position on what continuo was at the time, an article by Andrew Lawrence King, a fellow harp player, who wrote an article in 2013 called Sparrow Flavored Soup, or What is Continuo? In this article, Andrew Lawrence King starts from, of course, from Magazzari, which is the first source we have for basso continuo. And his starting point I totally share it. And also the aim of his article is something I share. Eventually they are the same thing. And this starting point and aim is, please avoid confusion and disorder in the continuum. And he advocates that in order to avoid this, we should just follow what Agazzari says and not misunderstand what he's reading. What he thinks we misunderstand is already at the beginning of the treatise by Agazzari, which now I will read. Of course, I know many of you know what I'm talking about. So this is just the beginning. So after saying that he will be very short and we will be very ordered in his treatise, it makes a very important distinction, which is, of course, fondamento and ornamento. Let me read in Italian what he writes. Pertanto, divideremo, you can follow, I think, yes, you see it here where So, pertanto divideremo essi strumenti in due ordini, cioè in alcuni come fondamento ed in altri come ornamento. Come fondamento sono quei che guidano e sostengono tutto il corpo delle voci e strumenti di detto concerto, quali sono organo, gravicembalo, eccetera, e similmente in occasione di poche e sole voci, liuto, arpa e tiorba. Come ornamento sono quelli che scherzando e contrapponteggiando rendono più gradevole e sonora l'armonia, cioè liuto, tiorba, arpa, lirone, eccetera, spinetta, chitarrina, violino, pandora e altri simili. I will read it also in an English translation. Thus, we will divide the instruments in two classes. That is, in one class as fundament and one other as ornament. As fundament serve those which guide and support the entire body of the voices and the instruments of the mentioned ensemble, which are organ, gravicembalo, etc. And in similar case, oh, sorry, this is a wrong translation. And in case of a solo voice or a few voices, lute, theorbo, and harp. As ornament, we have those ones which by joking, scherzando, joking around, and with the counterpoint, make the sound of the harmony more agreeable. And these are the lute, theorbo, harp, lirone, etc., spinetta, chitarrina, violin, pandora, and other similar instruments. So, the only one who share the two functions are, let's say, our instrument for harp and theorbo and lute players. So it's lute, theorbo, and harp. That's the only one who participate of the two categories, of the two ordini. So what Andrew Lawrence King believes is that what we nowadays call continuo is just the fondamento. The ornamento, he says, is division plane. We should translate the ornamento as a division plane. And this is the point where I don't agree, or I only partially agree. I believe that on the basis of Agazzari's word, division plane, we should better say passaggi or diminuzioni. I object that we can translate ornamento only as division plane. From the description of the instruments, it is clear that we can't translate ornamento as division plane. Why? Because we have at least one instrument, but other instruments which don't fit at all as a division instruments. Lirone, for example. Lirone cannot simply play in passaggi and diminuzioni. It's not the nature of the instrument. It's totally a harmonic instrument. So we must understand this category of Agazzari better. Also Pandora, another instrument which he cites, is not at all a very good instrument for divisions. So we have to find a better way to understand Agazzari's word. Of course, the intabulated continuo could suggest this rather, I would say, conservative, but not. I think we understand this conservative position on continuo playing. So let's more a simple realization, no? A simple realization of the basso could be suggested by the quintessence. We will see that we don't have only the printed sources, but we have many others, among which the manuscripts. Another category that, moreover, Andrew Lawrence King thinks that Agazzari's moment when he speaks about ornamento, and in general when he speaks about this function, is just doing exactly the same thing as Ganassi, Della Casa, Rognoni, the big tradition of division, of diminuzioni treatises. So his idea, which I partially share, is that nowadays, 1607, plain divisions could be done directly from the basso. And so we don't need to have the part which we have to diminish. We just need the basso, we just need the harmony, and then we can do divisions on it, which of course is a modern thing in a way, which could perfectly fit with Agazzari's idea. But once again, the way from Ganassi on until Rognoni, which is 1620, so it's even later than Agazzari, the way these treatises are done is totally different. They work on intervals. They say you should diminish this interval and you use these formulas and these other intervals, etc., etc., etc. Moreover, the instruments which are protagonists of the diminutions are not there. Cornetto, first of all, it's not mentioned. Flute is not mentioned. Of course, the one which is mentioned is violin. But we know that in 1607, it was still a lot in competition with at least the other two instruments as the king of diminutions, not to mention the gamba. We have the strong diminution of the gamba from Ortiz on, and gamba is not mentioned. So this ornamento ordini, in my opinion, has to be understood better and more than division playing. Could this ornamento be related to the Passaggi which we find in Kapsberger's books, in Kapsberger book in particular? This is what we will find out. Let me finish on this, and then maybe we start a little discussion on this part, and then I will go to the third book. Let me finish that I totally agree, as I said, with the starting point and the finishing point of Andrew Lawrence King, which I will read. I will quote him. Continuo bands playing divisions simultaneously but not quite together on several instruments, and playing divisions on fundamental instruments. We even hear continuo competing with the singers or solo instruments in the treble register. Precisely the zuppa e confusione, cosa dispiacevole, that Agazzari warns against. I think it's absolutely true. Every one of us who has a continuo experience, we experienced many times this kind of situation, and we don't want it to be like this. But the fact that Agazzari and many other writers warn against this danger, it means that it was done everywhere. And of course, that there is a good way of doing it, which is also described. Of course, it has to do with being capable of playing together, living space one another, etc., etc., etc. But this doesn't mean that this practice didn't exist in the continuo playing. So this is my first step. If everyone has some question, I would be happy to answer. No, okay, I can go on. So I would like now to enter Kapsberger third book. I will show in a moment. So this is the cover. This is Kapsberger cover. We can read libro terzo di intavolatura di chitarrone con sue tavole per suonare sopra la parte. This is the part we are interested in. After some brilliant toccatas gagliarde and correnti, much less than those we find in the first and fourth book. Unfortunately, as you know, the second book of Chitarrone is lost. But maybe someday we will find it, because this third book was not found so many years ago. So we have hope. So this third book has less toccatas gagliarde and correnti than the other ones. And then a certain point at page 35 of the print, it starts this section called Passaggi diversi sulle note per suonare sopra la parte. So this is, of course, the facsimile, but fortunately we have a modern translation. Here it is. Here you see the original intabulation down here, and here the transcription. What are these passages? Let me say that the modern edition I share is by Theodoros Kitsos, who did an amazing work on the continuo, on the theorbo in the 17th century, and it did a thesis you can find online called Continuo Practice for the Theorbo as indicated in the 17th century Italian printed and manuscript sources. Fantastic research. This Passaggi diversi per suonare sopra la parte, it starts with an F, as you see. He always gives the bass note, then a chordal realization, always, and then some passaggi start. First passaggio here, thirds. Then you have a kind of broken third here, F, A, B flat, G, A, C, and it finishes on the F. Then you have something we lute player would call a passaggio. This is really what is called passaggio in our literature. Again, broken chords here. I will go a little bit through this first example so we have an idea of what he does, and then of course I want to do the same for the rest. Once again here, broken, a big F chord broken. And then here we start with a typical theorbo feature, which are strascini, means legato with the left hand. Then we have another passaggio which eventually ends in thirds. Tirata here. Then we have a friend for us, which comes from maybe from the harp. No one knows, but it let the theorbo sound really like a harp. Some says that the origin of this, which is called, of course, campanelle, comes from the guitar, which was probably the first instrument which had this re-entrant tuning, which permits to do the campanelle. But I think that is more an imitation of the harp. It really sounds, it really has this harp sound. We will come back, of course, on these techniques and see how they develop in the other sources. You see that it becomes more and more virtuosistic. We have campanelle finishing with the passaggio, and here we have a big strascino, big legato passage. Here, interesting strascini with these legaturas, you obtain some odd rhythms. So you have ta 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 ra ta ra ra ti ra da ti da ta ra ra ti ra. So you have this effect of very odd rhythms, even if you see all 16 notes. And to finish, the longest passaggio here. So this is what it does on F, on the F harmony. So passaggi on the F harmony. We still don't know what these passaggi are. We have to question ourselves about this. What we can notice is that every passaggio is finished in itself. So it really lasts one bar. There is no exception. So the F doesn't come on the next beat, but it comes on the last beat of the measure. You see this? So we start from F and we finish on F here. We start from F here and we finish on F here. We start from a D, but we finish on F on the last beat. Always on the last beat. This could mean two things. One is that these are passaggi which I should maybe put one after the other. So I do a great Kapsberger passaggio on the F, and the next measure has a G minor harmony. Perfect. I go here to the G minor, and I put together another passage of G minor, and then I move to the other harmony. So it's like segments, it's like a Lego, which I could put one after the other. The other explanation is an economic explanation. Imagine you have to do this with the normal thinking we have on passaggi. So the normal thinking is that if we have to do a passaggio in F, we finish on F, and F is the first beat of the measure, let's say. This is what we normally do. And normally in the passaggi, we start many times on the upbeat. So to have this effect of something naturally going to the next bar, which will be our aiming point. This could also be an explanation, because if you want to do like this, so imagine that this is the beat, this is the beat, this is the beat, etc. It's much more difficult to write in a print, and it's much more you waste a lot of space, because you have to have like 2 bars and then have a kind of pause or an extra space to restart again. So this could be also my message is you can use it from 1 to 4 like this, 1, 2, 3, 4. But also if this is 2 in your mind, you can have 2, 3, 4, 1. Is it clear? So we don't have to believe that this is actual music. So that it's not the question is not. I see Margaret with the harp. coming out of a painting. This is not actual music, so you can use it as you want. Just models. We don't have to believe that this is really the beat. So it's a very, very interesting section. It goes from F to E flat. And it does F, F minor. The second example is F minor. One could maybe think that F minor is not such an incredibly used tonality in 16, 25, 26, but in fact, it is. It can happen that you have to play a passaggio on F minor. So you have F minor here, then you have F sharp 6. It doesn't write a 6, but the realization is a 6, etc., etc. And so we have 6 on the F sharp, G sharp, C sharp, D sharp. All the others are majors and minors. Let me scroll down with you until the next section, which is also very interesting. Here it is. It is called cadenze, you see it here, cadenze di quinta in giù e di quarta in su, which is of course what we call nowadays perfect cadence. So just 5/1 in the tonal language. They all have the same pattern. No space for fancy. It's just 5/4 chord. You see it here on the G, 5/4. Resolution of the 4 on the 3rd, 7th, and tonic chord. The 7th is always there, always, no exception, which is quite nowadays. I think we hear them much less than what they're recommended in this kind of practice source. The reflection, the thinking I do on this section is in the manuscript, they really are one after the other without no separation. It's just when the passaggi are finished, it just writes cadenza di quarta, quinta, giù, and it continues. So the cadenza and the passage belong to the same language. If cadenza is of course a thing that is a continuous thing, so you learn how to do a cadence. So the passaggi has to do with the continuo, for sure. Let me continue with this, because it becomes more interesting when it goes to cadenze di quinta in su e di quarta in giù. So what we call normally nowadays the plagal cadence. For example, here from G minor to D major. And like in the previous case, every time it gives 5/6 movement, which is absolutely what we find in the treatises. So you start on G major, in G minor, you go through the E, and you arrive on the D major. Very interesting, the second example. The second example to mention that all the book is thought for 19 chorus theorbo. You still hear me? It's okay. 19 chorus theorbo, and this example is from G sharp to D sharp major. Okay, you can read it also if you want from A flat major to E flat major. But anyway, this is to say that Kapsberger is thinking on the fact that you should be able to play in the continuo also on uncomfortable keys. So there's no the typical excuse of nowadays theorbos like us does not apply to Kapsberger. The fact that he thinks to G sharp instead of A flat is made clear by the next example here. Here is thinking on A flat and E flat. We could speculate that there was a reason of course, unequal temperament, so the positions could be used for this purpose, possible, but not so easy to demonstrate. If we go deep, yes, Anne-Marie.
Hello. There's another quote from these letters in Pisa, which maybe is interesting in this relation, because Kapsberger is sending manuscripts to Pisa, sometimes as a present for the patron. And once he sends a piece saying that this is in a very exotic key, and on a harpsichord you can only play it with split keys, but on the theorbo is possible. So I think for him, he must have been very conscious about that the theorbo could really play in each tonality. And for us harpsichordists, it's really interesting to say that he would hate it if it would be played without split keys, so that you have all the possibilities of the character of the tonality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The last section of the manuscript is the cadenza di grado in giù, what we call and was called in the sources the tenorizans cadence. This was a very, very important cadence, and we will find in a New York manuscript that it was the cadence to which the New York manuscripts dedicates the most of the cadences. So we tend many times to think in the tonal language, for which, of course, the 5-1 cadence is absolutely the most important, but the 2-1 cadence was absolutely key in these languages. It's typical of this music. And doing the 2-1 cadence, or the cadenza di grado in giù, better said, as he said, he always go through the sixth. So it's, as you can see from the first example, G minor, you go on the sixth, and then you go to F major, typical. So what we, I just interrupted the condivisione now. Sorry. There was the last section. The last section is the most, yeah. Tavola per suonare il chitarrone sopra il basso. And this is just chord shapes, one after the other, with no flats in the key here, no flats, and then you have one flat in the key. So chords with no flats and chords with one flat. The very last thing, there is also a section which I don't put here because it's not so interesting, is a correspondence between Italian tablature and French tablature. It shows where the notes are in both. What is interesting is this here, un tono più basso, and then we find una quarta più basso. He's very careful in saying that if you want to transpose, you should use these keys. Of course, for the old times, it's very, very important because they used chiavette all the times. They had to maybe do the same piece with once with a soprano and once with a contralto, so you have to transpose, maybe, etc., etc. So these keys to transpose are also a very important trace he puts everywhere in this section of this chordal section. So if we should have only a very vertical realization of the basso continuo, we just would need this section of the manuscript. Sorry, of the print. It remains a question, before going to Modena, it remains a question. Who this print is thought for? Anne-Marie gave us some hints maybe for, of course, for pupils, or maybe it could show like an introduction or maybe an advanced basso continuo for an expert player who knows. The didactic purpose is evident in this, but we don't know exactly what the public for this was, and it's a question on which I will return later. So let me go ahead to Modena. I would like to try to see if in the two most important sources we have for the basso continuo on the theorbo, which are by far Modena and New York more than Modena, we find some parallel with Kapsberger or not. So this is the first page of Modena manuscript. It's a big manuscript. There are 27 songs and cantatas for soprano and basso continuo, mostly unattributed, but 13 of them are for sure by Bellerofonte Castaldi, which already is a big hint we have on the circulation of this manuscript. At the end of this song section, it begins a section which is simply called Cadenze Finali. Here it is. It's clearly a later section. It's not from the same years of the songs. It was compiled probably in the 60s or the 70s, probably. We don't have any, we're not sure about this. What is important is that it consists only of these cadenze finali. There are 99 cadences. Let's call them like this, even if we will see that they are not only cadences. Are there some correspondence with Kapsberger? First of all, yes, from the abstract point of view. It's just a collection of abstract models. It's not music. It's just abstract models you can apply to your playing. And the second thing is that we have a very florid diminution in these treatises. An important feature also is that probably it was thought for a short theorbo, and for sure with 11 courses, not 14, because it arrives at this and not 19 as Kapsberger was using. So let's go to the modern transcription, which this time is by Tiziano Bagnati, who curated the modern edition for Ut Orpheus in the 90s. And let's see how the first page looks like in modern transcription. So this is a cadence from G to C. You remember that Kapsberger used 3 notes for the cadence, and this is a little bit more than 3 notes. And as you see, we have at the beginning, we have a passage, yeah, this one, from G to the IG, and then go back on the G. And then it starts a kind of broken thirds with the bass moving. This, I would say, is the most important feature of this manuscript. The bass is moving a lot. The manuscript, I go now fast because otherwise we don't have time for discussion, which I would love to have a lot with you. I just say that the first 57 example on 99 consist on these 5/1 cadences, let's say. And it uses cadences for C, for G, for A, for B flat, for D, and for F. So not for every tonality. A lot of tonalities are out of this, not like in Kapsberger example. Then at, I would like to go down, 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 scroll with you. You see that strascini are used everywhere. Campanelle are used really quite rarely in this source. And movement on contrabassi a lot. If we go here to 58, you see it here, 58. We now see that you go from G to A to B to C, and it continues in the next page, where you have D, E, F, G, and then going on C. So it's a complete gamut from G to G, and then cadence on C. And this is step movements ascending, and it teaches you how to diminish the step movements, both ascending and both descending. Then there is a section of ascending third lips, descending third lips. We are talking always of movements in the bass. And then you have ascending, descending fourths. And then the last section, which is very long, you can guess what it is the cadences when you go down one step, as Kapsberger did, the tenorizans cadence. Let me find it. It's starting on 87. Yes, from here you have still something right now from 88. Sorry. Okay, 88. You have C going to B flat, C minor going to B flat, etc. Here it starts these 2-1 cadences. So what we can learn from this source, of course, is a very well-known source in comparison with the New York source, which will now go fast. What is clear in this source is that campanelle are used not so much, strascini are used a lot, tirate are used a lot, and the contrabassi, the bordoni, are used quite a lot in the flourishing. And that cadences and passaggi are absolutely melting together in this source. So the fact that Kapsberger was putting passaggi and then cadences is not at all strange in this perspective. The two things goes together. If you have to go from one point to the other, which means, for example, you have to introduce an aria and you have to go from one point to the other, or you have to do a transition from an aria to the other, or you have to do a transition from the section to the other of the same aria. For example, a very good point when you all know when you have these fantastic compositions by I don't know Sigismondo d'India or Monteverdi, where the poem is so perfectly respected in each section. So the quartine of the sonetto finish, the music finishes, a new idea starts in the terzine. That's a perfect point to have a passaggio, for example, etc., etc. What does New York teaches us? I call it New York because, of course, it's the New York Public Library. This is the sigla of the manuscript. This is a very is a much less known source. Once again, Theodore Schizos did a fantastic work on it. I'm sorry because I've been away from home. I don't have the original, the facsimile, of course, of this section, but we have this beautiful modern transcription. It's thought for a 14 course theorbo. we can say from the beginning this is a much richer source of the two before. We don't know, as we don't know for Modena, for who was intended. I forgot one important thing from Modena. Let me say that. One of the hypotheses of the author of Modena is a certain Carlo Bertacchini, who was a lute, theorbo player, and probably other instruments, but especially it was a singer. In 1669, he writes in a letter that he was returning to his native land, which was Modena, and began to practice again the theorbo, since I was somehow lacking on the execution of flourishes necessary for accompanying. I read it once again. So he writes of himself, I was somewhat lacking on the execution of flourishes necessary for accompanying. So the flourishes, he says, are necessary for this, 1669. For accompanying himself. Let's go now on this New York source. We don't know who wrote it. We know that probably it's from the Bologna region, or from Bologna, the city itself. We know that Bologna was one of the last cities where we have an important witness of the use of the theorbo until very late. 1747 is the last document in San Petronio saying that the theorbo was used in the service. So this manuscript, it's another thing which is interesting, is that it could be a property. It could have been a property of Luigi Cherubini, the author of the Requiem di Medea, the famous composer, the last years of the 18th century, because Cherubini and Sarti, another composer from Bologna, were very much interested in the old art of accompaniment, and this manuscript has a relationship with his library. Was found in his library. It's a complex story, but it's interesting how completely things that could seem completely unrelated can be. So the manuscript has a very strange name. In fact, it has no name. We have the name of the first section, which is this one: Introduzioni a note con terza maggiore, con terza minore e terza naturale. What does it mean? It begins here. So we have G once again. The instrument is in G, so it's quite normal starting from G. G as the lowest note, of course. We have a common G major shape here, very common for theorbo players. Another here which is less common, but anyway, we move up the neck, and then we move once again. We do a big leap until the very last frets of the instrument. This is a characteristic of this manuscript. It uses the instrument until the very last fret of it. So it's not at all simple chords to be able to play some harmonies in the continuum. Not at all. It goes really deep in the technique and in the knowledge of the instrument. Then it comes these three sections, which are actually quite a mystery. We all know what Durezze means. Dissonances. In a way, he is suggesting that if you find a G, you should be able to play the normal chord, G major, but also the Durezza chord, so the dissonant chord that then brings you to the consonant chord. and it's here it's a 7-5-4. In many cases, we find 7-5-4-2. The complete chord. We would say the complete dominant chord on the tonic pedal. Durezze. Then the other just next to this is arpeggio. Of course, arpeggio is a technique, and theorbo is full of arpeggios. But once again, the harmony is absolutely the same. This time is really 7-5-4-2, going on the major chord. But the position of the chords is very interesting. This is a fantastic position for this chord, finishing on another great sounding position on the instrument. So it means that we don't know the difference between the two. Maybe it's just a technique. Maybe this is not arpeggiated. This is not in arpeggio. This is in arpeggio. We don't know. Or at least I don't know. Maybe someone else does, for sure. And ribattute, which once again reminds to a technique. And here we have a 5-4-2, no seventh, going to a 5-6 on the leading tone. The meaning of this, it's really difficult to understand, especially because it's really at the beginning of the section, and all the sections are done this way. You have the normal chords, you have the durezze, arpeggio, ribattute, and then campanelle. Here we are at home for theorbos and for harp players. So when you are studying the key of G major, you should know quite soon how to do the campanelle on the 5th, on the 3rd, and on the tonic, because they're very useful to play. The other thing you should know is how to do passaggi. Oh, so here we see a passaggio starting on a D major scale. Nowadays, I say it especially for the theorbo players, we would call this passage in campanellas, for sure, in campanelle. This manuscript uses campanelle in a restrictive way. So campanelle is just when you have a note, the note below, and the same note again. Ta-da-dam. This is campanelle, not something else. So even this passage, we would nowadays call it in campanelle. It doesn't. After campanelle, you have strascini. You start to move towards the G, because you have finally you have this C natural here, and then you arrive with a cadence on the, once again with the campanelle, you arrived on the G. So I have to move really forward. Do I have 5 minutes, Margaret?
Yes, sure. You have also more than 5 minutes.
Because Ned, I would like to discuss with you.
Don't worry.
About, yeah, okay. So is it clear until now? Any questions? No. Okay.
Yes.
Yes, you have. Yeah.
Yes, just this thing about the campanella is very interesting, because maybe we are calling the campanella when you have a diatonic passage with an scale, but using the campanella in this case, he's calling this passaggio. So maybe the campanella it was just this kind of trillo, but in different strings. What's your opinion on this? Or you think not, it was just in this case presented like that, and that the campanella, this term was used to do an scale in this way? Do you have another reference, another document, another?
When Sanz talks about campanellas, he talks about more than
Exactly.
just 2 notes. So I think it's a habit of this man writing. It's just that for him, when you say campanelle, it's just this kind of. I think that the very interesting thing beyond the terms is that for him, one of the first things you should learn when you learn to play in any key, in G major, in A minor, let's see another key. Let's see A minor, for example. Yeah. One of the first things you have to learn is how to do, is this A minor or A major? No, this is A major. A minor. No, A major. Okay, here. For example, you are in A major. One of the things you have to learn is how to do campanelle, especially on the third, on the fifth, and on the tonic. In this case, also on the fourth. But it's like if it's a very important part of your expertise on how play the continuo or to play over or sopra il basso. You should learn these formulas. You should learn that on the fifth, on the third, and on the tonic, you can do these campanellas. They're very effective, etc. Which we know it's quite true, because when you play theorbo, is a fantastic way of let the instrument resound and not doing. If you don't want to do a passaggio, which maybe melodically is more is leading a little bit too much. This is just taking the harmony and have a little game, a little scherzo, would say Agazzari, on the notes of the harmony. It's nothing more than this. A passaggio is something more complex from the point of view of the melody, and maybe sometimes of the harmony, as we saw in Modena. The second part is called like this. Abbellimenti sopra note di cadenza risolute con quarta e terza, e con quarta, terza e settima, e sesta risoluta con quinta falsa, e settima con sesta. It looks scary, but it's very simple. So, quarta e terza is the usual 4-3, so 5-4, 5-3. Quarta, terza, settima is the same thing with the seventh. Sesta risoluta con quinta falsa is when you have typically, for example, F sharp 6, and you add the quinta falsa, so diminished fifth, the C in this case. Settima con sesta is the typical 7-6 progression. Okay, let's see some examples which are not so evident as the other way. Let's see the first example. You are in G major, campanelle. You do a campanella on the fifth, and then you do a campanella on the E. Why? Because the E is the third of the C. So in this case, the campanella is already the resolution of the G. Where is the fourth? In this case, the fourth is just here. It's just the note, the note or the below note of the campanella. It's enough to let you hear this fourth that then goes on the major chord, which is here. With the seventh, it does the campanella on the seventh here. I don't know why there is this. It's a normal G. Ah, yeah, because there are two Gs. Okay, G F G, so the seventh, and then you have C, C B C, which is the tonic. Quite strange way to lead. Quite strange way of leading. as if the most important thing is just to let hear the harmony, the campanella on the 7th, and then another campanella to close it out on the tonic chord. So you see that we are miles away from the idea of a realization, a chordal realization with a perfect voice leading one on the other, maybe 4 voices. Yes, one very important thing in this manuscript, and also in Kapsberger, when you have the chord realization, 80% of the time is 3 voices, unless you have, like, for example, 7, 5, 4, 2, you have to have 5 voices. There is no chance. But when you have a normal 5-3, 6-3, this kind of chord, even 7-3, of course, is without the 5th, and it stays on 3 voices, no more. This is also very interesting. And for us theorbo players and lute players, and maybe also harp players, I don't know, I would like to ask you, it's very clear, because when you play continuo and you play fast sequences, if you start to play 4 voices on our instruments with our technique, which basically is based on these 3 fingers, as Kapsberger recommends, either the piece is very slow, either it becomes confusing, as Agazzari is pointing out, for example. So it's a thing that we have to keep in mind at the end of this, when we have the discussion. Let me go fast to the final sections, 2 final sections. Of course, we have here, you have, for example, 7-6. You start from the 7th, you go on the 6th. On the 6th, you have your groppo, which is done of campanellas, and then you go on the final chord here, F sharp minor in this case. So you have G 7 sharp, G6, F sharp minor, etc. Next and penultimate section, passaggi sopra note con accompagnamenti e a note di cadenza. What is this? It's just passages on some movements like 3-4-3 or 5-6-5, 7-6-5, 8-7, and they are very, very ornamented. They're very, very flourished. You can see it here. There are lots of notes from going from one harmony to the other. Sometimes with strascini technique, sometimes not. Campanellas everywhere, groppi everywhere, etc. Last section. Accompagnamenti sopra qualsivoglia note con ogni accidente in quante forme e maniere possano trovarsi, formarsi sopra la tastatura di theorbo, con risoluzione di settime e seste legate ed unite. This is the chord section. Here it gives you all the chords you need on G minor, G major. It's very systematic. It's very, it goes from minor, major, and then it goes minor third with minor 6, major third with minor 6, another chord which nowadays is a little suspect many times. They used it a lot. Minor third, major sixth, major sixth, major sixth, minor third, diminished fifths, etc. Up until very complex chords, like you see them here or here. So the instrument is, at the end, what I want to say is that the instrument is used in every possibility, from the technical point of view, and also from the from the kind of techniques, but also from the neck point of view, and from the tonalities, as you see. So my conclusion is that the fondamento e ornamento functions or ordini are in these sources, in Kapsberger and the 2 manuscripts, are completely intertwined. and we cannot separate one from the other because they are treated on the same way in the sources. And once again, we come back to the origin of the theorbo. So an instrument who is born as a continuo instrument and it becomes a solo instrument, and the two things cannot be separated. Finished. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's again super interesting. We will look now for questions. Open the discussion.
Yes, I have one question about. I wanted to come back to this. I know this is we don't know for sure. This it will be always a kind of issue for us musicians about the temperament on Kapsberger, because we are seeing in the third book he's using the instrument everywhere in every key, so very virtuoso. So what's your opinion on this point? Because it was a nice clue that Anne-Marie she said he was in collaboration, in touch with this academy with Galileo, and we know that Vincenzo Galileo already has had this confrontation with I don't remember the name right now. I don't remember the name right now, but he was not really defending, I think, the quabile, because it was one thing called the Aristoseno 1718, which was a kind of approaching to the quabile. So maybe they were in connection, and maybe Kapsberger was using this kind of equabile Aristoseno tenso, which was called. What's your opinion on this? Just your thoughts. I know we don't know anything for sure, but this is really interesting.
Sorry, Miguel, you asked me or Anne-Marie?
Just both of you or everybody. I mean, even better. But it was for you, of course.
Okay.
You're the lute player question. So
yes. First of all, I as Margaret said at the beginning, I do also a lot of late medieval music. So I'm used to Pythagorean temperament, for example. And I did quite a lot of research on temperaments. And what we can say for sure is that equal temperament was there at least from the end of the 15th century. There are many advocates from the end of the 15th century which stand for the equal temperament. One thing is doing the equal be able to do an equal temperament. The other thing is to demonstrate mathematically the equal temperament, which is very, very hard.
Exactly.
So the actual mathematical demonstration comes much later. But the fact that they were thinking about dividing in two equal parts the octave is as late as the 15th century. And of course, Vincenzo Galilei is the source for. Is very clear about this. It says the lute has to play with 12 equal semitones. There's no doubt about this. The fact that everybody did it, no, for sure. What we know from our experience, I think I speak for myself, but maybe it's shared by others. I would like to know what you think. Is that we can do minor corrections with the moving frets. We can do minor corrections, but when we start to do a real mean tone 1/4 of a comma, we have to do such big corrections which we don't see in the sources, nor the paintings, nor someone really speaking about this. And we do it very well because we have this Scotch tape with two parts when you can.
Yes.
But it's quite difficult if you don't have it. And anyway, another point against it for me is that when you play solo music, first of all, it's not true at all that they use, for example, the E major form on the first, the open E major, and then you use the second fret E major. Someone says that this is one for temperament, one for the other. But when you see toccatas by Kapsberger, and when you see this thing, they use one and the other with no problem. So the G sharp, they do it on the first fret, they do it on the fourth fret equally. So it's much.
In the Lacrime by Dowland, the positions are changing all the time. He's using the first fret to do a position with the third in the first string. So
exactly. This is when you see carefully the solo literature, it's another strong advocate for a kind of equal temperament. Then of course it's quite sad in a way, but maybe not. I don't know.
Maybe they were playing the solo music with this kind of quabile and playing the continuo, adapting with the cembalo or organ.
Who knows? It's also possible. We all did this experience also with trying to adapt. You can do minor adjustment in order to be able to play with Minton instruments. It can be possible. We do it nowadays, and I think they did it. They did it on. What I think is not really there is trying to have a clear Minton instrument on theorbo or lute. It's not just the nature of the instrument. This is very clear.
Okay. Thank you so much.
And then, sorry, another thing. When you play solo music and you cover your instrument with these small little frets, it's a mess because they are so far away sometimes from the normal positions you have that you risk that your performance is ruined by this. And it's much more difficult to be clean, to have a nice sound, etc. So,
in fact, we don't have many sources telling this use of little frets, not at all. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Elisa.
I wanted to know how do we know that the Modena manuscript was thought for a short theorbo, and what did you mean with short theorbo?
We know for sure that it was an 11-course theorbo, which is quite strange. All the theorbos we know from the past are 14 or more, or 13, but not 11. So the speculation of the ones who, it's not me. I'm not at all a scholar. I'm just a performer. The speculation of the ones who studied the manuscript was that since it was an 11-course instrument, and the way he uses the fretboard and the bass suggests that maybe it was a shorter instrument. This is the speculation of the ones who studied it. It's just
the measures. No.
Sorry.
It's also how short.
No, they don't speculate about it. But to me, in a way, it makes sense because the way the diminutions are written, the daily passage are written, is a little bit similar to the French style, where we know that the theorbo de pièce was a much smaller instrument and that they used the basis in another way. So it makes sense. It makes sense. Yes.
Michele, may I do a question? I was quite thrilled about this Passaggi diversi sulle note. Yeah, I mean exactly this one, the fourth bar where he starts with the 6, where you like suggested it could be like an economic way of writing. And I wanted to ask it, I mean, if it would, I find it somehow strange to think it in this economic way, because he would maybe have written like a pause at the beginning of the bar to indicate that it should lead into F. This is something that I would ask myself. Or could it be like in a continuo piece where we have an F in the bass line, that it's just very nice to start with this added 6 on top of it, because it's really aesthetically different than if we would like do a campanello on the 5th or on the 3rd. So
I think that is a perfect question, Margaret, because exactly this bar, to me, points to both ways of thinking. One is the one you told, so that we read actually as it's written. So we start on the D exactly on the first beat, and then we finish on the F exactly on the last beat. So you have a 6th on the first, and in the middle you have a 4th. Fantastic. Very nice, very spicy.
yeah, and
Yes.
he's so sophisticated.
Also, sorry?
I was saying, and as he's such a sophisticated composer, it makes me also think that he wants
Absolutely.
to use it, that we use it more in this way.
That's perfect. But on the other hand, if you do the same thing, the thing I suggested, and you imagine a pause at the beginning and then you finish 1 octave later, it's a perfect and usual passaggio for F. So you start on the 6th, you arrive at the half of the measure which you are on the 3rd, and then da, 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 and you arrive on the tonic. So I think that you can use this material really as you want. This is just didactic purpose. It's just models, and the models can be memorized with the first note on the beat, with the first note not on the beat. The fact that the pause is not there, it's exactly what I meant as economic writing, because if you have to write a pause, then you have to shift everything an octave later, and then you have to arrive after the double bar. And then after the double bar, you have to leave some space to make clear that another diminution started. So the economic way of writing is just, I write my notes in 1 bar like this, and then you do what you want with this. This is my thought.
Thank you very much.
There was another question I saw.
Yeah, Michele, I had
Yes.
one. And first of all, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. It was really detailed and clear, so thank you. And I wanted just to come back to the main topic. So to make sure I got what you meant when you were discussing Andrew Lawrence King's article. So what you saw as problematic is his definition of strumenti of ornamento, and in particular their playing. So the fact is that you don't see this playing as just diminution, like in an exclusive way, right? So we should not consider ornamental instruments' role as a merely melodic ornamentation, basically, especially in polyphonic instruments. So they could be like diminutions, but not just that. So this would be misleading and reductive, basically, right? So because I totally agree with you that this is really more complex than that. I think you showed very well the fact that it has to do with we would say the harmony, so the context and the contrapuntal context in which all of those passaggi, the ribattute, echi, fughe, as Agazzari mentioned. So right, can you elaborate?
Yes. This is exactly the point. Andrew Lawrence King and many other scholars, I took his article because it was in a way very clear and very well done also. They believe that the basso continuo is only the fondamento part of the Agazzari treatise, and the ornamento part is just division playing. So the two things are separate. The fact that these sources we have for the theorbo demonstrate that at this time, so from the 1720s to the 70s or maybe also 80s with New York, we don't know exactly. The two things started to melt together. So someone who teaches you how to do continuo teaches you also how to do diminutions. And theorbo, harp, this kind of instrument, they are the perfect instrument where the two things melt together. And this is very clear from these sources. They are not separated anymore. In a way, it's also the things that the diminutions are running away during the 17th century. Diminutions are something that are very, very important in the 16th century. Then they have a little bit of fortune again until the 30s, I would say, maximum 40s of the 17th century, and then they're not so important anymore. Where do they go? They go also in this practice. If we think to the theorbo, the only two diminutions I know, but maybe someone of you knows much more than me, are the ones in the terzo libro. In the terzo libro, we have these two beautiful diminutions and very virtuosistic diminutions by Kapsberger on two madrigals, Come Esser Può by Gesualdo, and the other one by Architect is, I don't remember now, but it's easy to find. Ancidetemi pur, no. But another one by Architect. There are two famous madrigals which have diminutions. Ancidetemi pur by Architect, and Come Esser Può by Gesualdo. He does diminutions on them. And then he starts this Passaggi section. So one could think also, oh yes, perfect, you did the diminution, and now you teach me how to do diminutions. Yes, but the fact that diminutions are not absent from the continuo practice is demonstrated by these two other sources, the manuscript sources, which melt the things together. So they're not separated anymore in the mature 17th century. The two things tend to go together. They're not separate practices. This is my point. And what I would like to add on this, it's a reflection on the manuscript and the prints, which is the ones who know me know very well. But I would like to tell right now briefly, because it's to me is key. When you have a source, we should do like police investigations. Ask the 5 W's in English: when, where, what, why, and the last one, who, of course. Among these, the very, very important one is why. So why this thing came out, especially with the prints. And with the prints, we have always to remember that a print is a commercial enterprise. Except a few cases, prints are done to make money. The person who prints it is convinced that this thing will let him make a lot of money, not the person who writes it. I'm not saying that everyone who writes his solo music does it to make money. No, it's not this. But the person who prints it, yes, because he has an enterprise and he wants the book to travel. The manuscripts are normally a completely different thing. So it's not rare. On the other hand, is common, and we lute players, we know very well, for example, the case of Capirola, but many other examples, that manuscripts many times gives us indications in techniques, in embellishments, or in other fields that we don't have in the prints, for many reasons, because prints are public, and maybe I don't want to show my art completely, which is a very common way of thinking at the time. Maybe it's too expensive to write exactly what I want to do. So in the manuscripts many times gives us a perspective which is in a way more close to what the actual practice was. And this is for sure the case of the New York manuscript, which gives us invaluable information. Also Modena, but Modena is in a way a little bit more normal. New York is really incredibly rich with these durezze, with these arpeggi, with these ribattute, things that we wouldn't really imagine from if we wouldn't have this manuscript.
Thank you so much. I think you are completely right saying that this, this new way, this new approach, from the 16th century, rise up and rise in the 70s probably. So like the prima pratica polyphony, and all that practices that somehow they started just very late to be put into writing. At the time were just practices, and what we can see, for example, in concertato practices, so in later written concertato practices, but we have historical account talking about, discussing and describing all these concertati negli strumenti, so all these kind of dialogues between instruments and voices. I think this completely fits what you are saying about the theorbo practice and accompaniment. So thank you.
Yes, Gustavo is raising his hand.
Yes, thank you really for this really illustrative conference. It was quite interesting. I'm curious about this kind of basso continuo realizations that are here, if they can be done for different measures. I think I say binary, ternary measures, which kind of repertoire, if it's like more vocal music or also kind of dances, what we can infer about all these sources?
Very nice question, difficult to answer. But what is important, and I didn't say in the presentation, is that you notice that New York has no rhythmic values. All the notes are like a Gregorian chant. There's no rhythmic indication at all in New York. And this goes again with what I was saying, discussing with Margaret, on the fact that it's just raw material that you can use rhythmically more or less as you want. In New York, it's very clear. Where can you use it? This is once again one of the things that I would agree with Edu Lawrence King, and in fact with the Gazzari, that the context is the most important thing. Of course, if one starts to feel with a lot of Passaggi and Campanellas, a moment like Solemnity for Francis Xavier, or the one. So of course the context is the most important thing. The Passaggi and the Groppi and the Campanellas are valuable for all the context, but the way you use them is the key. Of course, when you use a huge, when you want to do a big passage, for example, is normally when the music stops. I did the example before. You have a sonetto by Petrarch, put in music by Sigismondo d'India. You finish the quartine. Normally the harmony changes. That's a very natural moment when the theorbo harp player should do a passage, should introduce this. Or normally in a cadence, when the soprano is doing the 2-1 movement. So she's moving, you are in F, she's moving from G to F. Normally, it's not a very good point for her to make an embellishment. It's up to you, which normally will have the leading tone, to do a groppo or to do something on the leading tone. So you should have to study the piece and understand where these things can be used. But it's very clear that in normal practice, we need these tools, which are really, really valuable for continual practice in every kind of genre, depending on the context.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we are there.
Yes, I think Annemarie already left.
No, she's with us.
She's still there? Okay. Are there the last possibility for questions?
I think we are already 15 minutes late.
Okay, so thank you very much for my two brilliant guests. It was fantastic. I'm very, very happy, and it was such great stuff. And I would like now to study for months this beautiful stuff. Michele, next time when we meet each other, you will leave a surprise in the orchestra pit. So really very nice, and thank you all the public that you have been with us this whole morning. Really great, and I hope very much that we continue with this lecture with different instruments together to share our ideas and also knowledge and our questions. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, Margaret. It was fantastic.
Thank you, Margaret.
Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. It was really great. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.